Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bone. Today we're talking about per diem athletic training, and we have 3 people that have done multiple talks on this subject and what athletic trainers need to consider when you go out on your own as an independent contractor trying to pick up a little extra money on the side, or it could be your full-time job as a per diem athletic trainer covering random events and tournaments, or being contracted specifically by a company. So today we have Andy Carter, Paul Rupp, and Jason Doctor. So Andy, if you want to start us off with an introduction of how you're involved and what you're doing and where you're at.
Thanks, Shelby. My name's Andy Carter. I'm an athletic trainer in Williamsburg, Virginia. I work for Riverside Health Systems as an outreach athletic trainer to Queens Lake Middle School and Bruton High School. I also am the chair of the NATA Council on Practice Advancement, or COPA. And COPA is a council of 10 subject matter expert panels that create resources and tools and provide advocacy contexts and things for a variety of settings and employment models within the profession of athletic training. And so my connection to per diem here is that, probably like all of us, I've done it at one point or another, but I most recently, the community outreach panel for COPA did a survey of athletic trainers who do per diem and PRN work, and our findings were recently published in the November 25 edition of the NATA News. And so got with these guys, they had an idea, and so I joined them to bring some of that data to their brainchild about going around and doing some discussions on per diem and PRN work.
Gotcha. And then Paul, let's see what you're doing out there.
Sure. So I'm a secondary school athletic trainer in Northern Virginia. I'm also the committee chair on the NATA Committee on Professional Ethics. So in talking with Jason over the past years, talking about how people are practicing, and we talked about when we first started, obviously all the gray hairs, they go all the way to the roots, and we kind of age ourselves. And I look back at some of the things I've done in the past, and I got lucky. And I don't want our young professionals to get lucky. I want them to be prepared and be able to practice safely and not get in any trouble. So Jason, Andy, and I, we kind of got together and came up with a presentation to help educate our membership.
Yeah. And then Jason, where are you and how are you involved? Yeah. So Paul had mentioned a little bit about how athletic trainers have been somewhat lucky over the past few years with possible liability, legality, the risk that's involved with per diem. Can we talk a little bit more about some of those specific instances of what maybe athletic trainers aren't thinking about when they go out willy-nilly to do per diem work on the weekend or after work and stuff?
Sure. What really is most important is understanding your state practice acts, and licensure laws. Working and living on the border between Maryland and Virginia, a lot of opportunities, kind of go all over to West Virginia, Maryland. I have to be licensed in those states to be able to practice there, unless I'm traveling with my team. Now, things are changing with laws, and I think Andy can speak a little better to the compact that's kind of starting nationally, where different states are signing into a compact, which gives more freedom for athletic trainers to kind of go from state to state, working off their original state license. But it's really important to know what your state practice acts are, or what state laws regarding practice of athletic training entail, such as concussion laws, heat management laws, things like that, and being prepared to manage those emergencies.
Yeah. Jason, did you want to touch on some of those things?
Yeah, those are the big issues that we kind of targeted in our original talk, was just what are the lightning heat policies, what are the concussion policies that are needed, and then what is in the tournament information. Who makes the weather calls? Is it the athletic trainer? Is it a tournament director? Is it the officials on the field? And is it a central location that they're running off of? If the tournament is using multiple sites, are you using it off of the main site, and you might have other satellite sites that are a few miles away? Or how are those policies being told to the athletic training staff, the tournament staff, and then also the coaches and teams that are there? So there's continuity across the facility and across the tournament.
Yeah. Well, I know that like lightning is 6 miles flash to bang, where like I think Las Vegas, I think some of the high schools it's if you see lightning, but Las Vegas is so flat that you can see lightning 15 miles away and they still have to cut it. So definitely understanding those different rules, and even at the different levels of competition where you're doing per diem is very important.
Where we run into issues too is just the overall administration of doing the job. And I think when John Q athletic trainer walks into their secondary school athletic training facility and they start their job on the first day, a lot of those administrative things are already in place. Maybe you already have a team physician, maybe you already have emergency action plans that you'll need to modify, but you need to look through those. Supplies will be there, or you'll have a budget to order supplies. And so all those things that make us be able to do our job effectively and legally and ethically are already kind of in place. But when you go out into the per diem or PRN world, 53% of the athletic trainers who on our survey reported doing per diem work reported being hired as independent contractors directly by the client. So, like Jason was describing a big soccer tournament, the soccer tournament director hires you as the athletic trainer for that event. You're hired as an independent contractor. So it's on you to make sure you have supplies, to make sure that you have professional liability coverage, to make sure you have physician oversight, make sure you have all the things in place that allow you to practice effectively and legally and ethically in order to do that. And for some athletic trainers, that's a burden. For some, they just don't know what all those things are, what all those things are required. And I think that's one of the benefits of this discussion these guys started, to educate our members on what do you really need to look at when you're going to go take on one of these PRN roles, especially as an independent contractor.
Yeah, I think liability insurance has been a big, not necessarily debate, but just something that people don't understand, that it's best practice just to have it no matter what, to protect yourself from anything. Your company can sometimes yoink that from under your feet pretty quickly. And then obviously standing orders, I don't know if a lot of people understand how to get it, and access to that can be pretty difficult. Going off of that, did you already say how many people have liability insurance and how many reported didn't?
Yeah, so we had just under 400 respondents to our survey, and it was heartwarming to find that 60% of athletic trainers who do per diem work purchase their own professional liability insurance coverage. There were percentages of folks that, if they're a full-time employee for a hospital system who also does some PRN coverage, and they're provided that, then they're going to get that insurance on top of that. Some relied solely on that insurance. Some, expected the clients to have that services, and that's pretty rare. The concern there is we had around 6% of respondents who didn't have professional liability insurance coverage in place when they did their per diem work, and even 5 maybe equally or more troubling is that there were maybe 3% who didn't know if they had coverage, but they did the coverage anyway. And so um, I think there's an educational piece that goes with this to understand the need for professional liability insurance. Some people confuse the idea of liability insurance that a soccer tournament might take on versus this professional liability insurance. The liability insurance that the soccer tournament purchases for their, event is slip and fall insurance. If someone, crashes their car into the parking lot or falls backwards out of the bleachers and gets injured, that's what that insurance is for. This professional liability insurance coverage covers us when we're acting within our scope of practice. And in order to be, covered, you've got to be practicing legally and ethically as it relates to your state practice act. But that's insurance that you typically have to purchase on your own, or if your employer provides it and you're providing that coverage on the basis of your employer.
Yeah. Did you guys look into how many athletic trainers had HIPAA compliant documentation platforms when they were doing per diem at all?
Yes, interesting question. It ran the gamut because we knew on the basis of a lot of these folks, again, over half of them being independent contractors, wouldn't likely have, an electronic medical record. And so we even included in our survey paper pencil as a means of recording data. And so we had roughly 20% were doing paper pencil records and storing them themselves. So it's not just the gathering of the record, but it's who's in charge of it, who stores it, how long do you have to store it. Those are dictated by state law. Paper pencil that's stored by their employer, again, about over 20%. About 5% actually purchase their own electronic medical record to do this work. The largest was the athletic trainers who provide PRN work for their employer use their own EMR there. Scariest, 18% didn't keep documentation for the care they provide and per diem work. And so, I mean, that's a giant blind spot there for athletic trainers in the profession who are doing this work.
And then we kind of touched on it before we started recording, but what about employers with a non-compete or just that, the liability standpoint that they state that they're not covering you if you do per diem work?
Jason, you want to address that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any data on that information. That's usually something from what, just at the times I've done this talk is people need to either have that tough conversation with their employer or look over their contract that they sign for their normal employment. Around here, in Virginia, there is a lot of hospital-based athletic trainers, and I know some of them try to cover those events, so I think that's covered. But if you're going outside of that, that's definitely something that, to me, is you should look at as the athletic trainer yourself into. And then also just on that documentation stuff, some other stuff that's come up is most people don't even know what's the prior history on all these athletes. Does the club even require a physical to join the team? Is there any kind of prior documentation that is done, prior history documentation that's done by the team before these athletes and people show up at a tournament? And then Paul can also speak on too the consent to treat aspect of it when you're at the tournament. Does the tournament require a consent to treat? Is there any? I've been to tournaments where there's people coming in from Canada. There was a field hockey tournament I covered where people came from, I think, Curacao. So when you're dealing with international events, that's a totally different also player that's into this conversation.
Yeah. Paul, do you want to touch on the consent to treat a little bit?
So it's really important when we, especially minors, when you're treating minors, that we have permission to touch them and treat them. And it should be an informed consent. So when you go to touch a knee, low back, wherever you're going to touch, do they know why you're touching them there? Or are you going to get accused for inappropriately touching a minor? When they do have information, but do you have to consent to treat? Again, working different PRN events, and a coach brings over a kid, or a kid walks over, hey, I just hurt my ankle. Take a look at me. Well, are the parents okay with you taking a look at them? And you would think that, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, the Latin term parente loco, where the coach would have that authority, but has a parent signed off on that and given that right to the coach? So if you don't have that right, you shouldn't be even treating the athlete, evaluating the athlete. Yes, you can do emergency first aid, but if a kid's walking over, breathing, talking normal, saying, "Hey, I got hurt," how much of an emergency is it? So do you have permission to treat? And that's really important. Fortunately, if a parent is there to watch, they can give you that. I would, in my documentation, note that was given verbal permission by the parent to treat. But without that, what kind of risks are you taking on? What legal ramifications are there for treating a minor without permission? And we don't think about those kind of things.
Yeah, or even if they're going to a tournament with a different family. So is it really guardianship, or is it just that it's a weekend and they're minors? How do you work around those type of limitations too? Yeah, I'm trying to think where I
And
was going with
that
that.
all goes to what kind of documentation the club, how does a student, an athlete sign into that club, that team, that organization, that tournament, whether it be Special Olympics. And I know Special Olympics organizations like that have phenomenal documentation, but as the athletic trainer, do I get to see that? What do I know what's in it? You know what I mean? So when you're talking to the administrator of that organization, hey, can I take a look at what kind of documents you make your athletes sign or their parents? And that's going to vary from a 7-on-7 high school football tournament to again Special Olympics events like that, where it's going to vary from coach to administrator to organization, and how well organized are those things.
Yeah. Well, and I know I staffed for jiu-jitsu at one point, and I think they had a liability waiver since the combat sport of, the protections of what they could sue and not sue for because it was such a risky sport at the end of the day. I don't know if my company ever saw that. I wasn't necessarily involved in that part of it, but it does bring up those questions of, well, what am I protected from on making decisions, or what I'm treating when I'm at these events? So when somebody's going into a per diem setting, even if they're doing it on their own or going through a company, what are some questions that they should ask before providing coverage to an event?
There's tons. One, like the bare minimum is ask if there's anything provided, like supply wise. I would ask at the start, just supply wise, like, is there an AED on site if it's at a public park or somewhere like that? Do I have direct access, or is there around here in Virginia, they started putting up like almost like a call box that you go to the box, you call 911, they give you a code to that box to access the AED. So at least things are getting done there. Do you provide your own AED? And also, with all these things, is that conversation to increase pay and show your worth? Is there already a pre-made emergency action plan? Does the facility that they're renting have it made? Did the tournament make it? Again, here in Virginia, I've worked a field hockey tournament that the employer that I worked for was out of Boston, Massachusetts. They came and rented the facility here in Richmond, Virginia. Do they know the protocols? Is there gates? Who has access to these gates? Is there a facility person that's going to be on site that you can talk to about an EAP that works there every weekend? If it's a custodian type person, but at least they're going to have keys and access to these gates that might be closed or locked. Does anyone know how EMS is coming or going? Those are, to me, are just the major things that I ask or would ask the tournament to kind of bare minimum before stepping on the field, that at least these things. Is there a weather monitoring system? And is that what we're going off of, or are we going off of somebody's cell phone, or what the local policy is? Questions to just ask. And is there administrative stuff that you have to do if these things aren't done, that you could ask the person hiring you, hey, I've got 4 hours of administrative work before I even step out to this tournament. Is there a way I can get paid for that? Or, hey, I want to get paid more because there's gaps in care. And I think that's a totally separate issue of, do we as athletic trainers show tournaments and people the value that we bring that way, besides standing out on the actual field with a medical bag for when it happens? What the planning that should go in before you even step out on that. So
yeah. Well, and I think one of the biggest questions I've always had is, who's following up with the athlete after the event if they do get injured. Is it the tournament? Is it me? Is it up to the parent? And I don't know if that's ever clearly stated anywhere of if they get a concussion during the event, how are they being disqualified? Do I pull their player's card? Do I go turn it in somewhere? And then who's clearing them to return back to tournament play afterwards, that they've been medically cleared by their physician or whoever that is at the end of the day. So I think sometimes we forget about the post-event cleanup of how to make sure that all your ducks are in a line afterwards, which I don't know if you guys looked into that at all either.
That's a great point. I think what it comes down to is documentation.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to go home with that kid, right? And so it's incumbent upon us to give good, clear direction, discharge instructions. If you leave the emergency room, here's what it is. Here's what you should be doing. Here's why you should come back, and what the next steps are. And I think we have to operate from that standpoint with the parents and transfer the responsibility of the care of that kid from our own care to whoever is in charge of that kid. And if the parent isn't there, that's a coach, that might be another family that kid's staying with. There has to be a positive transfer of care. You have to document that you've given them those clear directions, and there's an expectation. I think having worked some pretty tournaments and league play and that sort of thing, there has generally been an administrator or a commissioner or some person who's responsible for the overall play. And I think having contact with them early, and especially on the day of the event, to say, hey, look, if I got a problem with a coach, I say this kid has concussion, he can't play anymore, and I get some beef, I'm going to come to you. And you hired me to be the medical expert here, and I'm going to tell you that this kid can't play anymore. Then it's up to you to sort that out. And so that you sort of can go back to your job, and the administrator can handle that. I think that's a decent way to handle it, because otherwise you get in the weeds with one kid. Now you're not doing your actual job of taking care of the rest of the kids who are still at play.
Yeah. Paul, did you have something to say on that too?
I was leading into what Andy was saying. I agree with almost everything that he said. It's just working at the secondary school setting. Say how many Mondays come around and in walks an athlete, whether it's from a lacrosse tournament, a soccer tournament. Yeah, I got hit at the soccer tournament last weekend. What the athletic trainer say? Oh, they didn't. I don't know, something about a fracture or a break, or I don't know. And it would be nice to have that communication or some sort of documentation to say what the diagnosis was, what they did for him, things like that.
Yeah. Is there any liability of emailing your report to a parent about their athlete's injury or anything? It always seems kind of like a gray area of sending your notes out to other parties after an injury.
I think it would depend on who you're sending to. Most emails are relatively secure, so to email a parent directly. But if you're emailing 8 different people, and that's where it can kind of get a little shady in that who else is sending it, who else seeing it. But directly emailing a parent, emails are fairly secure. We send out school information that way. So I would think it'd be relatively safe as long as you're making sure and you're verifying that email address.
Gotcha.
I like to have a phone call, and I guess I'm old school. I like to get on the phone and talk to a parent, because then I have the opportunity to answer any of the questions they have. And if I've got a document that parent wants to see, I can always scan the information on my phone and give them the hard copy. And so then I've got a copy, they've got the information is another way to do it. So you're not transmitting it, you're handing it directly to somebody to be able to do that. That's how I handle sideline concussion evaluations. I'm going to give a kid the hard copy of my Scat 6 form. I'm going to scan it before I do, so I've got the copy, because who knows, I'm going to say, hey, follow up with our doc on Monday, and they may go, I got to go to the emergency room tonight. And so I want that emergency room doc to have that information, my evaluation, in their hands. So that's the way that I can accomplish that on the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
Technology helps us with that a little bit.
Yeah. So there is the Interstate Compact coming up, which will open up the ability for athletic trainers to cross state lines or travel with different companies to provide coverage and all that. What I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit already of making sure you're checking the practice acts and all that type of stuff. Are there any other things that athletic trainers should look out for when they are looking to work in other locations doing per diem work?
Again, I think it goes to knowing those state laws. If you're crossing state lines, what is that state's concussion law? What is that state's heat illness law? What is that state's cardiac? In Virginia, we have a cardiac law with ensuring education and AED is available. So all those kind of laws that cover what we practice and how we practice, we need to make sure that you're working within those laws.
Gotcha.
I was going to say, that's a great question. Is the compact going to put somewhere that information? Like, would it be beneficial for, if this goes through, that they mandate every state put somewhere, if it's on a compact website or something, of what the information is for each state? Because, some people, how are you finding it? If you're just Googling it or trying to put it in ChatGPT, how reliable is that information, and where's that information pulling from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, NATA has links on its advocacy section on the website to all of the state practice acts. So you can do that. The compact really is just creating a situation of reciprocity. The state practice act is still the state practice act. In Virginia, you're in Virginia. If you go to another compact state, your practice act and your scope of practice is going to follow you to that state, essentially. So in terms of changing the dynamic, not necessarily, but I think the importance is, finding that information, and all the states have that information on there. And the NATA has it at your fingertips with a click, an interactive map where you can click on a state and find out what the practice act is in that state. Some states, even before the compact, would allow you to come and practice for a few days prior, before you needed to get licensed in that state. And that was to ensure that athletic trainers could travel across state lines with teams, things like that. So we were avoiding that, because the implication is not necessarily just that you're impersonating an athletic trainer when you're practicing without a license, but it also has implications on your liability coverage. So your professional liability coverage you purchase, in the background there is making sure that you're doing all the right things as it relates to your practice act, whether that's being licensed, that's following the scope of practice, having whatever supervision is outlined in your practice act by a physician, and all those things. So your coverage is sort of buttressed by, that understanding that you're doing things right.
Yeah. Well, and I think many people get confused with the temporary practice in other states. Usually that is because you are employed by that
Right.
school or company, that organization, so you are providing direct care to those athletes. With per diem, many states have rules and regulation on third-party employment. So if you are working for a per diem company, you're technically a third party covering the event. You're not actually employed by the event. So I know that some of the business regulations in certain states, I think athletic trainers are pretty naive to and don't understand. And those are risks and liabilities to working per diem, even with the compact. That will be interesting how that unfolds as people start moving around a little bit more with different companies or per diem opportunities.
That's a great point. The other piece is that over half of them are hired directly by the event, and so in that situation, almost certainly you need a license that's in that state that's viable. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it pays to sort of dig into this before you just sort of sign up for a tournament.
Yeah. Well, and then I don't know if NATA's really sent anything out, but I know in California there's AB5, which is it limits what gig work, contract work, per diem work looks like. There's rules that have to be followed to figure out if you're an employee or not. And it's actually at the national level. It hasn't been passed yet, but the PRO Act, where it really limits per diem gig work opportunities and what needs to be provided by the person hiring you. So I don't know if NATA has done anything or provided any information on that. I've tried to look at the California Athletic Training Association, and I haven't seen any direct information on what athletic trainers need to look out when they're doing per diem in that state either.
I'm not familiar, but I certainly, I'll send this down to our community outreach folks to dig into a little bit. It's interesting. If that becomes a national level situation, that's something we're going to have to dig into. Sometimes California goes in directions and everyone just watches and lets the smoke clear, and see what comes of it. But if this gets legs, it's going to be a bigger issue.
Yeah. Well, and then that kind of goes into, we're talking a lot about the athletic training and protection of the athletic trainer, but business-wise, have you guys done any, created any data points on the business aspects of per diem athletic training, like salary or what else would there be? It seems like per diem's pretty simple on the business side, but I know there's other things involved on it.
Yeah, I think when you look at on the salary side, when we did the survey, our initial sort of goal was to develop some salary data as it relates to per diem and PRN work to give people some leverage when they're going in and trying to negotiate these rates and things. And so what we found in our survey, and again, we had 44 out of 50 states represented, just under 400. The average hourly rate was $38.70. The sort of the range for that sort of standard deviation was 35.86 to 41.58. And so we did have the lowest rate reported was $20 an hour, which is pretty rough. And then the highest reported rate was $200 an hour. And so again, how do you account for all those differences? $200 an hour is probably some old guy that really wanted, who didn't want to do the per diem work, and he negotiated them up. All kidding aside, I think it's locality. So if you're in an urban area where you can demand these things a little bit more, and it sort of tracks what normal salaries go. We looked into too, like, what are the other benefits that you get beyond monetary compensation? And so 37%, almost 38% said that they got clothing on top of that, which I imagine is the old tournament T-shirt, which we all have a million of. 35% got mileage reimbursement, which is helpful, again, if you're traveling pretty far, with gas prices the way they are. I was just out in California for spring break, and the gas was $6 a gallon. It's bananas. That mileage reimbursement's important. Meals, 30% reported they got meals when they were on site working. And then some other things: professional liability insurance, pay for training, mandatory training that goes with it, CEUs, license fees, things like that. Our guess is, and we'd have to dig back through the raw data, is that a lot of these were reported by athletic trainers who worked PRN or per diem for their company. These aren't independent contractors or per diem headhunter types, but probably more that are doing hospital outreach PRN work. So there are some benefits there that you can negotiate for, to do that. We looked at who hired the athletic trainer. You talk about a business model, like we said, direct independent contractor, 50%. Hospital systems, physical therapy practices, physician offices are all groups that do some PRN hiring. But 21% of the respondents indicated they were hired by an AT-owned business. And so there are entrepreneurial opportunities out there for athletic trainers who either want to do PRN or do PRN, form a PRN company and hire athletic trainers, basically do the administrative legwork piece and hire athletic trainers. And so that number, 21%, represents those folks, but also represents the athletic trainers who maybe do PRN on a more full-time basis. We saw, 20% of our respondents were athletic trainers who did PRN as their sole means of income. So they're full-time PRN, which is kind of like jumbo shrimp. It's an oxymoron, right? And so a lot of these folks will form an LLC to protect some of their personal liability, create a little business model, business structure that protects their own personal liability and shields that from the business of any liability that comes there. Now, the critical part with the LLC is it's not going to shield you from professional liability. So if you're, or charged with negligence or sued for negligence and you lose the case, you could still, they're going to come after your assets. But, again, that LLC kind of shields those things and allows more of a pass-through tax situation, and kind of keeps things clean, from a business standpoint. But yeah, entrepreneur, we have with our within COPA, we have the entrepreneurship panel, and they've partnered with Outreach to look into some of these issues and ways that athletic trainers can, protect their business, build a business, startups and keep them, sustainable over time. And a lot of it comes down to following these practices that we're talking about and sort of keeping yourself out of hot water.
Yeah. And those are just on the website, correct? Or are these more speaking engagements or CEUs that are on the NATA website?
All of the above. So if you go to NATA and emerging practice, there's a section for what's called private practice. That's our entrepreneurship folks. They have a lot of that information there. The Educate platform, which is free to all members, is continuing education. And there's quite a bit of entrepreneurship content that a lot of our guys have created that's there. And, I think what you'll find at a lot of your meetings these days are athletic training and athletic training meetings are talks where people are talking about how to start a business and those kinds of things. It's a pretty high demand. It's the thing, as the chair of COPA, that we get the most questions about. Can you tell me how to start a business? And so we have a group that helps with that.
So going back to like the hourly rate ranges that you guys had had been brought up in your gathering of data, that's quite a range of like $20 to $200 an hour.
Yeah.
I was just trying to staff someone for San Francisco proper, and they're saying that their minimum rate is $90 an hour. So my biggest question, and what I was trying to do with my doctorate capstone, was, is there a way to create a formula on the different parts of your hourly wage? Because obviously liability, you have to pay into that every year. Maybe your memberships or just maintaining your certification. How can someone kind of calculate what their hourly rate is within the location? Obviously, we said California is kind of doing their things and we're kind of watching how they do things. I know a lot of these per diem cultures in different states, they've definitely band together and created standards for the market. Do you guys have any feedback on how, if I was entering the per diem market tomorrow and I was trying to negotiate a rate, how can I bring those numbers together to make sure that I'm being compensated appropriately for my value as an athletic trainer, but even the administrative costs of me being able to do per diem athletic training?
I think on the locality side, there are calculators out there that will help you determine what that sort of locality expense is. One that comes to mind, MIT has I think it's called the livable wage or the living wage, where it'll look at, your area and what that sort of premium is as it relates to living and working in that space. It's an interesting concept because you can look at it from a lot of different ways. I think one way is to look at jobs that are posted and see what jobs are, if they're advertising the salary, you can find that out. I think local per diem contractors can probably give you some of that data. They might be reluctant to, unless you want to work for them, but that may be a place to go. The Athletic Training Network, reaching out to colleagues who are doing it in that space, finding out what the regular pay is, and know that per diem and PRN generally is at a premium, is that piece of it too. I think on the other, your administrative expense, to me, depends on how much of this you're going to take on. If you're doing like a one-time soccer tournament because you feel like you owe it to the community, that's one thing. But if this is going to be a major portion of your, your income, you might want to think about investing in, some things that are going to make your life a little bit better, which might be an electronic medical record where you don't have to worry about storage of data and all that sort of stuff. Or you might want to invest in your own AED because you don't have to rely on other folks to have that there and make sure it's charged and make sure the pads aren't expired and all those things that give you peace of mind that for me as a business owner would be important. So supplies, how do you deal with that and that sort of thing. So once you start doing that, then you're sort of building this sort of business model, this pro forma that you can then extrapolate what your going rate is. And then all bets are off when you start hiring other people to do those things, right? Because you got to take your piece of that as well. And like I said, there are a lot of athletic trainers out here who are doing this very thing where they're having they're starting a business to provide per diem service and coverage. So there's a lot of athletic trainers out in the community that could be a resource for you.
On top of that, I think this is a very personal topic in that a young professional needs to pay their student loans and they got to pay their rent, their car, all that kind of stuff. They just need some cash, so they're going to be more likely to take a little less. I'm working 40 to 60-hour weeks. To get me out of the house on a Saturday or Sunday, you're going to need to make it worth my time. So what's your time worth to you? And that all goes into it. All those things that Andy talked about. Not only are you buying an AED, a electronic record keeping system, do you need to get a different car? If you have a small Honda Civic, can you get a cooler? Can you get an AED? Can you get your med kit? Can you get a cooling tub? Can you get all those things in your vehicle? Or are you going to buy a motorhome and have like a mobile emergency room on wheels? There's so many different things that go into how creative you are, how much is your time worth, where you live and what's the cost of living there. So many variables that go into what are you going to charge and what's it worth to you.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting. I mean, I've worked a lot of per diem and I've never been given an actual description of what entails the per diem work that I'm going into, which I think is somewhat interesting. I think we all know it's emergency care, injury evaluation, but once you get into prophylactic taping, there are other facets that come along when you're working per diem of, somebody may have a question about an ongoing injury or chronic injury, I guess. Am I really should I be giving them advice as an athletic trainer right there? Is that really in my duties? I think athletic trainers are very humble and want to help everybody that comes across. But I think those are some of the things to help elevate athletic training is defining what am I here to provide? Who am I responding to? Because we've all had to probably respond to somebody in the stands that slipped in the parking lot and split their lip or a cardiac arrest situation. So have you guys seen anything about job descriptions when you're doing a per diem event or any descriptors of what you're responsible for?
No, that's like back to the original earlier question here is, like that kind of stuff should be asked before you take the position. I've dealt with a parent at a soccer tournament that popped his Achilles chasing a ball that went out of bounds, jumped off the bleacher and popped his Achilles tendon. Like, do I have to do that? That facility I spoke about earlier is adding a whole park and splash pad. So that's going to open a whole different set of can of worms of everyone's little brother or little sister that's there watching their big brother or sister play is going to be over there. There's going to be broken arms. There's going to be slip and falls. Like, is that my job to deal with all that? Is it discussed at the start? Is that kind of not? Is the athletic trainer really going to turn down a kid whose mom comes running over that my kid just broke their arm over there? But there again, then are you setting yourself up for other liability if you now leave the fields that you're sitting here watching to go run to the parking lot, split an arm and wait for EMS for somebody that's technically not even part of the tournament, but it is there as a bystander? Like, yeah, those are, to me, those are topics that need to be discussed before and educated to the tournament providers beforehand. But there again, is there that time? How many people get a call or an email on a Wednesday for a tournament that's Friday? So how much time do you actually have to gather all this information that you should be gathering and you need to do the job correctly? Is the system technically flawed because you don't even have time to get the stuff to do it 100% how you should do it because everything's so last minute?
So kind of, I feel like we're getting into the ethics of things a little bit. So if you find out that the event doesn't have an AED or the facility doesn't have an AED, the level of importance of there being a medically trained professional at the event, does that technically increase the need because there isn't proper equipment, or should athletic trainers just decline those types of events? How can somebody that really needs the money, like a new graduate, kind of navigate those situations?
I'll let Paul I actually answer this question. I'll throw in 2 cents first, but it's, to me, it boils down to what's your risk of the risk that you're willing to accept as an athletic trainer. Like, yeah, if you show up and you're promised these things, like it's, and I don't even know if this is the correct way to say it. If something majorly happens, you're not involved. You have no liability. That's all on the tournament. If you show up and the stuff that you said or they said should be there and that isn't, if you walk away at the start, you're, I doubt you signed a contract beforehand that you're not on the hook, or at least you can say, hey, in this contract, these things were supposed to be done, and I'm walking away. It's a tough decision, but to me, that's what I would do. I'll let Paul, go on to the ethics side, technically.
So likely there may not be a written contract, but there's probably a verbal contract. And like Jason said, if they don't have what they said they were going to supply, if they did not provide what's supposed to be there, they have broken their part of the contract. So that would give you the right to walk away. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so that would be a court issue. When we look at from an ethical standpoint, we're really looking at your actions against the code of ethics. The three principles we look at the most are Principle 2, complying with the laws and regulations governing the practice of athletic training. Principle 3, promote high standards in their provision of service. And Principle 4, not engage in contact that can be considered a conflict of interest. So in those three, and there's sub principles within those three principles. So it breaks it down a little more. But to that point, are you doing those things? And if you're promoting high standards in your care, you're following the state laws and engaging in conduct that cannot be construed as conflict of interest, probably doing okay ethically. Where you're kind of looking at the conflict of interest, are you holding out a kid because your son or daughter is playing and they're playing against your son and daughter and they tweak their ankle and you're holding them out because you don't want them competing against your son or daughter? Very few people are doing that. I'm not suggesting that's a common thing, but the question could be asked. And do you want to be in that position to have to answer those questions? You know what I mean? So as long as you're following the code of ethics, you're practicing the highest standards possible, and you're following the laws, you're probably doing okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's you go.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little different take on this. It's hilarious. This is so literally the nightmare scenario that we kicked around for weeks was they said there'd be an AD and there isn't, and so now what? And so to me, you're an athletic trainer. There's times where stuff doesn't work or stuff isn't there. You can't get to the thing. I'm gonna do CPR. I'm gonna do the best I can on that kid. And I'll document all the things and I'll have discussions, very frank discussions about why those things aren't there. But I don't think that we're taking on some giant risk by going to a place that doesn't have an AED, because there'll be places we go that don't have an AED, and we still are going to activate the emergency plan, which is doing CPR, and the ambulance gets there and does all the things. So that's kind of where I am. I would say the way to do this is, we led off this discussion with you probably don't have a contract with them. I would say you ought to have a contract with them, and you ought to go back to the job description piece to say, what is my job and who am I responsible to take care of? And this is why this matters, because in the case of a kid at the tournament, you're obviously responsible for them. But are you responsible for the parent who pops their Achilles, right? Because if you're not and you provide care to them, you're not getting paid to do that. That wasn't your duty. That wasn't your responsibility. So from a negligence standpoint, you've crossed a lot of those factors off, and now you can rely on a good Samaritan defense if they come back and say you did the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you have a duty to act, you are getting paid to provide a service for that kid in the tournament, and therefore you're held to a different standard and a different set of negligence rules as it relates to that. And the Good Samaritan wouldn't apply to you at that point. So that's why all those things are important, to get them in writing, to be very precise when you define your duties and your expectations, what's provided, and all those things. Because at the end of the day, in our survey, we asked, why do people work per diem and PRN? And 40% of them was a multiple select. You could select all that applied. 40% of people said they did it to fill a need in the community. And I think that there's a part of that where we're athletic trainers have a servant heart, and we're going to make sure people get taken care of. And so I don't think there's probably many athletic trainers are going to walk away when the AED's pads are expired. from that setting. So, you put yourself in a place to protect yourself as much as you can. You document the care that you provide, and you do the best you can. That's my thought.
I don't disagree with any of that from looking at the code of ethics and whether you're practicing ethically. That's where I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think many have, I mean, it seems that it's a weird point in per diem athletic training in that obviously I think it's a great way to make money, especially when you're newly certified and still trying to get experience and all that. But I feel that there is also a lot of people leaving per diem or, definitely asking for higher rates just due to the liability portion of it, or the culture of a lot of tournaments and per diem events for the athletic trainer. It's just the culture of interactions, dealing with the parents, the athletes. It's kind of a hassle and it's very demanding. And we're in such a litigious society these days. You never know who's gonna sue you for what. And I know we talked about liability insurance and coverage already, but there's just those wild cards that come out of the shadows. And, that's why a lot of referees are starting to leave youth sports, is just the environment is kind of toxic and unhealthy, and you're not really treated with respect at the end of the day.
I think the good news is that people generally see us as somebody who's trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you present yourself in a way that is respectful and responsible and professional, people give you the benefit of the doubt you're trying to do the right thing. I've had parents yell and scream at me and swear at me. I've been in the middle of the field holding cervical spine stabilization on a kid while the parents and coaches are fighting around me. And I held the kid's head between my knees and called on my cell phone and asked for an ambulance. And I said, by the way, go ahead and send the police as well. So we all have those kinds of stories, but I've never felt like someone was attacking me for being there to help. And I always kind of go back to that. And maybe I'm lucky. I probably have gotten lucky in the past. But if you kind of maintain your calm and just, hey, I'm trying to do the right thing, you'll have people that question, well, why are you taking my kid out and all that sort of stuff? But we face that all the time in our regular jobs. And as long as we can justify that, we maintain calm and we stay respectful and all that. I mean, we don't have the luxury of practicing within the walls of our own office. I worked college athletics for 18 years, and then I got a job as an outreach athletic trainer in the middle school. One of the biggest things I had to get used to were there were no fences. So I'm evaluating a kid on the field, and looking over my shoulder is grandma and mom and dad and Uncle Riri, and everybody is right there when I'm doing this evaluation, right? And asking questions and some different level of being freaked out because it's probably the first time their kid's gotten hurt. So that was a whole different deal. So it is a little bit of the Wild West when you go out to some of these things. I think you can demand a little bit higher salary and maybe expect a little bit higher level of shenanigans when you go out and do these things.
As you guys have looked into per diem athletic training, this is more of a general question on the identity of athletic training, but does per diem work strengthen the profession by creating flexibility, or does it weaken it by fragmenting professional identity, since it's kind of one-off instances that we are going into the community and covering events?
This is a question we kind of ended our talk with when we did these talks: is PRN work good for the profession? And the way I see it, there's different kinds of PRN work. There's going to volunteer for Special Olympics or a special event. And then there's the long-term subbing for somebody that's out sick, and you're going to an organization that hires athletic trainers, but you're filling in for somebody that's not available. And then you've got the one-off. You're there for a weekend. You're there for one tournament. And I pose the question. I challenge whether or not it's good for the profession, in that if I'm going and covering a local college that's understaffed, and I'm filling in covering for $50 an hour to cover games, what's that university's incentive to hire a full-time athletic trainer when they can pay me $50? They don't have to pay for retirement. They don't have to pay tax, all those different things. What's their incentive to hire to go out and really get another good paying full-time position, as opposed to some of the soccer organizations? If they can pay one person to cover 4 fields for $50, What's their incentive to hire somebody full-time to organize it and provide care all week long for those club kids and take care of them year round as opposed to just on a Saturday for $50 an hour? What's the incentive to grow and get better? Just a thought. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. It's just the way I think about it.
Well, it seems that from my experience, medical is always the last box to check for tournament coverage. So it's always an emergent need to get it staffed. I think the Massachusetts incident that happened, about a month ago now, where the athletic trainer wasn't on site because she had the day off and the lacrosse kid broke his arm, and a lifeguard was the one that responded, I think, or
Yeah,
was
but
that the concussion that was happening?
it was my understanding that it was a lacrosse game scrimmage on a Saturday where an athlete broke his arm and was displaced, and the athletic trainer is a part-time athletic trainer. They're not even full-time, and she was covering something else for the school.
Mm-hmm.
And they just didn't call her, they didn't contact her, they didn't reach out, and they gave her such a hard time that she resigned from the position for something that, again, I don't see as being her fault. Mm-hmm. So now they have nobody, as opposed to even a part-time position. They went from a part-time, not full coverage, to now nothing. I don't know how that works out better for the.
Yeah. Well, and I know with staffing, that has become a big question when recruiting athletic trainers is how many fields, how many athletes, how many gyms are going along, and then how many athletic trainers. I don't know. I know that NATA had put out an equation of proper athlete to athletic trainer ratio, but those seem to be full-time settings. I don't know if it actually is applicable to per diem or tournament functions where it's massive amount of athletes coming in with the turnover of competition. So there's the preparation while the game's going on, while other games are going around that court. But I've always wondered, do we need to update those ratios and include per diem into that research that they did?
You're talking about the AMCA document, the appropriate medical coverage for intercollegiate athletics.
Yeah.
That was done a number of years ago, and I think for what it was worth at the time, and if you were able to use it in conjunction with other tools to sort of develop an overall picture, it certainly wasn't a cut and paste sort of tool that was necessarily as handy as you'd hoped it would be. I think part of the reason for that is that there's lots of differences between college athletics. There was a similar document with secondary schools. With the per diem work, there's just so many more variables. And like Jason said, one thing is we don't have medical histories on these people. They're just humans that show up to play a sport. We don't have, for example, we don't have sickle cell trait information on these folks. We don't have all the information at our fingertips like we would at the college setting to be able to understand who are our risks and how do we mitigate those things. And so I would submit that having that information makes it far easier to provide not just coverage, but medical care for the participants at one of those types of, a college, practice or an event. The numbers are huge. I think the differences in how far apart fields are, what access do you have to transportation? Is there a gate? Or all those things kind of go into the mix. And then what are your responsibilities? Again, getting those defined. If you're responsible for every human that comes to that event, or you're just responsible for the people on the field, that changes the equation as well. And so I don't know what the answer is. I think common sense, it says it's not one athletic trainer per field or per 10 fields, but I don't think it's probably one per field either, depending on where those fields are and that sort of thing. I don't do this much, but I don't see it being, there's an economics to this as well. And that's going to get tricky. And so are we trying to have some coverage versus excellent coverage versus no coverage, and where are we going to fall into the mix? And so if we're filling that need in the community and trying to take care of people, where does that number fall?
Yeah. I just came to mind of, what is the proper ratio? And obviously the sporting type is a big factor too. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if anybody's actually done research on taking injury incidences for certain sports and tried to delineate that data of, well, this is a higher risk sport. if there's multiple fields, what is the proper coverage? And the events are getting insurance coverage just for the event also. And I'm sure that athletic trainers are starting to make it into those insurance documents, but I don't think they've really calculated what is defined as proper coverage for the type of event or how big the event is at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's totally different. I've seen it just in tournaments that I cover. Like there's a huge soccer tournament here that's 5 or 6 weekends in a row. And it's broken up by different age groups and things like that. And it's the worst age group is actually the high school girls. Out of all of them, most people don't want to cover it. And it's just because like the demand there is, most of the girls want to get taped or some kind of taping or this and that. So it's like, do you have enough athletic trainers if 4 girls want to come up and tape, do you have enough people to sit there and tape all these people while games are going on? You don't, it's not like at a school or something like that where you have, everyone's school ends at 2, but everyone's practice doesn't start till 3. So you have time to spread this out. It's constantly, there's maybe 10-minute breaks in between these tournaments because you have people warming up on the sidelines and all these other things that it's kind of chaos that I don't think there is a realistic way to do it besides kind of experience. And over the year working these tournaments, like it's evolved, like there's been more, like there's talks of honestly putting an athletic trainer up by the bathrooms just to do taping and blisters, because by the last day then everyone has blisters because they decided to buy new cleats beforehand, that you don't even have time to that it's a full-time job, kind of pre-care and band-aid care, and then you're not even watching the field for an injury. So I think it's very tournament specific, and that's another dynamic in this of building out the case of what kind of supervision and what kind of eyes need to be on it to make it better, because it's just continuing to grow.
So going into the future, things are these organizations that you guys are a part of with NATA, COPA, those different avenues. What are some of the next research or data collection that you guys are doing? Or what questions are you guys trying to answer going forward?
Interesting. I think we probably hope to enhance the salary survey to gather more of this salary related data to give people a better, again, just better data points to be able to negotiate for better salaries. And I think that helps, not just salaries, but benefits and other things, non-monetary things as well. We've got to do better. I think the ethics side of this, when you look at documentation, we look at physician oversight and all these things where athletic trainers, there's a cohort of athletic trainers who aren't doing the right thing. It's a lot like speeding to me. We all drive too fast, and for the most part, we get away with it, especially when we're not being reckless. And so then occasionally we'll get busted and get a ticket. And, that's a situation where you were caught, without enough equipment or with, too many people, and nothing bad happened. You just got a ticket, and it was kind of a reminder, hey, you need to do the right thing. But occasionally we get a bad outcome. And those are the ones that end up in the newspaper and social media and all that. And that's where it can kind of catch up with you. And the problem is we get this sort of complacency effect where we didn't get in trouble for a lot of time speeding. We didn't get a ticket for a number of years, and it was okay. But I think we need to circle back to, I think, our students and our educators and our mentors and preceptors and everybody who's sort of shaping the culture of how we practice athletic training, and make sure that we need to be doing the right thing when nobody's watching. And that's what keeps us out of trouble in these kinds of situations, and probably steers a lot of athletic trainers away from this type of coverage if they're actually thinking through things.
How do we better educate athletic trainers on liability coverage? I think that's one of the biggest parts of this whole conversation is, there's obviously general, professional, there's a few different facets to it, but even just personalizing your coverage for the types of sports that you might be covering in per diem, like combat sports, or if you're just doing golf or something a little bit more low risk, how do we get it out there that athletic trainers really should hold their own insurance no matter where they're working at the end of the day?
The ATA has a the NATA liability toolkit, which is available to members online. And in that, you plug in your situation. It asks you a series of questions about, you know, the type of event coverage, sort of all the nuts and bolts around what you're doing. And then at the end, it spits out a series of sort of responses to those, to your answers, that sort of sends you in the direction of, well, you should really look into this, or you should really look into that, to help to sort of personalize, like you say, your risk profile. It's not perfect, but it makes you think through a lot of those types of questions if you fill that out. And you can create one of those for each of the things you do. You can do it for your regular job, and you can do it for your per diem gig, and you can do it for the side hustle thing you're doing over here, and whatever it is. And because those risk profiles are going to be different, based on what those activities are that you're doing. And it goes back to the education side, making sure that we're doing a good job there. Our group, trying to, create educational content that supports athletic trainers doing this type of work. And a big part of that is doing it the right way. And Paul's work with the Committee on Professional Ethics, and, they're always looking to create tools and resources to make people do the right thing. But to me, it's a cultural thing. Like, we've got to get to a place where it's an expectation of what you do. So many athletic trainers don't document the care they provide in general. We got to get to a place where that's an expectation, not just well, you ought to do it.
I'll throw in from the sales side and medical side. I've challenged some of these EMR companies and concussion companies of, hey, I think you're missing the target of going to some of these youth organizations and selling those services there. To me, I'm not one that we've got to throw it all on the athletic trainer that does it. Like, why isn't someone approaching USA Soccer? Why isn't someone approaching Little League Baseball, Little League Softball, and saying, hey, parents are throwing money. The money that's in these organizations is ridiculous. You're paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for your kid to sign up. $10 to have the, concussion management for the club or for the whole organization, or the EMR for the organization, that the information is there for when you're in a tournament in Richmond one weekend, Dallas the next weekend, and, California 2 weekends from now. Because, it would be nice to see, hey, this person that said, hey, I got injured last weekend at this tournament, I don't know what was done there. Is there a way for some of these companies that are already member, do stuff with the NATA to approach some of these youth sport organizations to get them on?
Are there any takeaways that we missed? I know that we touched a lot of subjects and bounced around, but any other points that we need to cover?
I think we hit most of them.
I think our takeaways from our talk are basically do your homework, and that starts with, dealing with the tournament organizer, whoever's trying to hire you, to sort of, put things in place to make sure that you have a clear roles and responsibilities, clear understanding what they're providing for you, what your duties are. And the second one's be prepared, and that's, liability insurance, all the administrative things, but it's, are you ready to deal with whatever comes when you get to the site? And then the last thing is do the right thing. And that's the ethics side, that's the legal side, that's practice as a professional, behave as a professional, dress as a professional. You're out representing the profession. And I think to go back to, is PRN and per diem good for the profession? One of the things is it gets athletic trainers out in front of people who may never have interacted with one. And so I think that's a responsibility. If you're going out and doing this stuff on the weekends, and you're the first athletic trainer someone's made, you really need to make a bang up impression, because the rest of us are going to, live or die by that impression that you made. And hopefully that's a good one. They had a great interaction. They got good care, good follow up, good communication by someone who, was responsible and knew what they were doing, and behaved that way. I think that's a good way to get our kind of the who we are out there, is to have, have a parent go, man, there was an athletic trainer at that field, and they really took care of my kid and sent us in the right direction.
Yeah.
And you never know when that parent or grandparent that you just helped their kid, maybe a senator or congressman, whether it be federal or state, and they're going to be voting on some law that's going to affect your job. And so the impression you give is going to be lasting.
To finish it up, don't be afraid to ask all the questions, especially if you're being employed by a non-athletic training company directly by the organization, they might not know, depending again on the athletic trainer that they hired before, all the stuff that they do. Was the athletic trainer there before literally just band-aids, ice, and this and that, and didn't even talk administration? Use it as a way to leverage the skill set that athletic trainers have, besides the stereotypical handing out ice bags and taping ankles. Like, show the value that you bring for all the other legal, ethical, and laws of governing sports that
Well, and that made me think Go for Ellis has obviously become a big platform to connect athletic trainers to per diem opportunities. They are only a technology platform. They obviously have questionnaires to try to get as much information, but when you sign up for those, you really do need to check in with the tournament event, the person of contact, before you arrive on site, because it's not Go for Ellis's due diligence to find all these questions for you. It is your responsibility as an athletic trainer, just as a side note.
Correct.
Well, so if anybody wanted to get involved with any of these organizations, how's the best way to do that?
For NATA, Gather is the community portal that all of the volunteer opportunities are posted on. We've got a few posted for COPA right now, so they just log in there and they can submit their application and see what's available. But that's on the NATA side. Paul, you've been involved in the VATA and district level. Talk a little about those other opportunities locally.
Yeah, at every state, local organization, there's some sort of leadership. There's some sort of meeting. The VATA is usually the first weekend in January. Mid-Atlantic is the district meeting is first weekend in May. Walk up and talk to people. Don't be afraid to seek out the leaders, seek out the more experienced members that are there. And just ask, how can I help? There's always something that can be done. So if you want to get involved, step up and ask, and we'll give you something to do. I'm sure somebody there can ask and can use another set of hands. And you get athletic training is a word of mouth profession. When somebody needs something, oh yeah, I remember at conference, so and so helped us out. They might be a good resource for you. And reach out and just meet people. People remember.
Networking is super important, and then all state and district associations have normally leadership on their website that there's plenty of committees and plenty of ways to reach out and volunteer and either get on a committee and then become a chair, or other organizations, other ways to help through the organization. If it's something that's I've worked at the state and district level, if it's something that's intimidating, going to the district level first, start at the state level and get involved, and all it does is help your network grow and help the progression.
Definitely.
But people talk about getting involved, and it sounds like committee work and all those things. But you can also just be connected, like be better connected to your profession and to your community and your network of athletic trainers, and it's as easy as maintaining your membership, reading emails that come from the association, following groups on social media. That's going to trigger some idea or some question you have that's going to make you reach out to someone, and that's going to deepen your network. And eventually, if that question keeps growing, then ultimately you get three guys together, they go to a couple talks, and that's kind of how this thing happened. It was about each of us reaching out to our networks. Find a mentor, be a mentor, all those things that can connect you with professionals are kind of the precursors to sending you in the direction of doing some volunteer work.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to thank you guys for being on. Are you guys speaking at NATA in Philadelphia this year?
Not speaking, but definitely be there.
Okay. So definitely find any three of these guys if you have more questions. Start a conversation or just introduce yourself. They're a wealth of knowledge and have great resources to help you professionally and, on the per diem side if you're trying to get more into that too. So thank you so much for the three of you coordinating to be on the show. This was great to talk about some of the culture things that happen in per diem and what people need to look out for. Many people think it's just a one-off, I just show up and leave, where there's a lot more rooted into per diem that many people miss. So I want to thank you so much, and hopefully we can all link up in Philadelphia.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Thanks for having us.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Shelby.
Thanks.
that's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It's hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.